In the wild and unforgiving landscape of the American West, there was a man who had known both the freedom and the hardships that came with living out here. His cabin, tucked away deep in the mountains, was isolated from the world. For miles around, there were no neighbors, no towns, and no signs of civilization. It was just him, the cold and the unforgiving land. He had come to the West years ago looking for a fresh start. He had been a prospector, spending long hours in the mines searching for gold. There had been times when he'd struck it rich and his pockets had been full. But now his luck had run out and his gold had dried up. The man's name, though not important to most, was Jack. Jack had grown used to the solitude. He had learned to depend on himself for everything. He hunted his own food, chopped wood to keep his cabin warm, and mended his clothes with his own hands. He wasn't afraid of the cold or the harshness of nature, but even someone as self-sufficient as Jack could feel the weight of uncertainty when things weren't going right. Lately, he had been feeling it more and more. The gold he had been mining was gone and his supplies were running low. The weather was turning colder and winter was fast approaching. The prospect of spending another harsh winter alone with no money and dwindling food was a grim thought. He had enough for a few more days, maybe a week if he stretched things out, but that was all. He could see his fortune slipping away with every passing hour. One late afternoon, as the sky turned gray and the wind picked up, Jack realized he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to get to the nearest trading post, which was a day's journey on foot, to buy supplies for the long winter ahead. His last few dollars would have to stretch as far as they could, but there was no other choice. The cold was already biting at his skin, and he knew that the longer he stayed here, the worse things would get. With a heavy heart, he packed his gear, strapped on his coat, and set out. The snow crunched beneath his boots and the wind howled through the trees as he made his way through the wilderness. He was used to walking in the cold, but this was different. The air was sharper, the wind stronger, and he could feel the chill cutting through him like a knife. As Jack moved along the snow-covered trail, his mind wandered to the past. There had been a time when he was full of hope, when he first arrived in the West ready to make his fortune. But over the years, hope had turned into struggle. The land was unforgiving, and the promise of riches was often just that, a promise that was rarely kept. But Jack never gave up. He had seen too many others come and go, defeated by the harshness of life here. But Jack had always found a way to survive. Now as he walked through the snow, Jack's thoughts were interrupted by something unusual. In the distance, he saw a figure moving slowly through the snow. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the wind, but as he got closer, he realized it was a woman. She was stumbling, her movements slow and unsteady. Her clothes were torn and tattered, offering little protection from the cold. She was thin, too thin, and her skin was pale, almost as if she had been out in the wilderness for far too long. Jack's heart skipped a beat. His first instinct was to keep walking. After all, this was a harsh land, and people didn't survive out here without being tough. But something about this woman stopped him in his tracks. She was in trouble, and Jack knew he couldn't leave her to die. He hesitated for only a moment before rushing to her side. "Ma'am, you all right?" Jack called out, his voice rough from the cold. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, and she looked at him with distrust. She didn't speak, just stared at him, as if unsure of whether he was a friend or a foe. Jack knew that, given the history of settlers and Native Americans in this land, she probably didn't trust him. He wasn't surprised. Most people wouldn't. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you," Jack said softly, trying to calm her down. "You need to get out of this cold. You're not going to make it if you stay out here." She didn't respond, but her body swayed and she nearly collapsed into Jack's arms. He caught her, holding her steady. She was cold, dangerously cold. Her teeth chattered and her skin felt like ice. Without thinking, Jack hoisted her up onto his shoulder, and with determination he started walking toward his cabin. The woman didn't resist, but she didn't speak either. Jack's mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing out here? He knew this part of the country well, and there weren't many people out here. In fact, he hadn't seen another soul for miles. But something about her presence made him uneasy. She wasn't dressed like the settlers he had encountered in the past. Her clothing was more suited to a nomadic life, and her features were sharp, her skin darker than most white settlers. She could be Native American, but Jack didn't want to make any assumptions. What mattered was that she needed help and he could give it. The walk back to his cabin seemed longer than usual. The snow was falling heavier now, and the wind was howling through the trees, making it hard to see. But Jack didn't care. He just kept walking, his thoughts focused on getting this woman to safety. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but the thought of leaving her out here in the cold was unbearable. When they finally reached the cabin, Jack carefully set her down by the fire. He hurried to gather blankets and warm water to help bring her body temperature back up. He worked quickly, trying not to waste a moment. His supplies were low, but he couldn't just leave her to die. Not after everything he had seen. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. Jack's mind raced. Should he go for help? Should he leave her here alone and risk running into trouble with whoever might be looking for her? He didn't know what to do, but he knew that he couldn't leave her out there. After a few hours, the woman's condition improved slightly. Her breathing steadied, and her body stopped shaking, but she was still weak. And Jack knew that she was far from out of danger. He had no idea what she had been through, but it was clear that her survival had been hard-won. As he sat there beside the fire watching her sleep, Jack couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. He had just spent the last of his money to buy supplies for a harsh winter, and now he was giving up what little he had left to help a stranger. But Jack had always believed in doing what was right no matter the cost. And now, for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. The woman's survival might be a question of luck, but Jack knew that he would do everything in his power to make sure she lived. After all, the Wild West wasn't just about gold and riches. It was about survival. And sometimes that meant helping someone in need, even if it meant risking everything. The storm outside howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows of Jack's cabin. But inside, the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth was a small comfort. The woman still lying by the fire had not stirred for hours. Jack kept an eye on her as he worked quietly in the cabin, trying to keep his mind busy while the uncertainty of the situation loomed over him. He had always prided himself on being self-reliant. But this, caring for a stranger who seemed to come from a world so different from his own, was something entirely new. As the night stretched on, the woman's condition began to stabilize. Her breath, once shallow and erratic, had become more regular. Jack made sure to feed the fire and keep the cabin warm, knowing that the cold would be just as dangerous to her as the injuries she had endured. Every now and then he would glance at her, still wrapped in a thick blanket near the fire, her face pale but calmer. Despite the quiet of the night, Jack's mind was far from peaceful. He had 1,000 questions, but he didn't dare ask her yet. By morning, the storm had not let up, and Jack knew he would be stuck in the cabin with her for at least another day. The wind howled outside, but the snow was beginning to slow. It was still far too dangerous to head out and leave her alone, especially when she was so fragile. So Jack did what he always did when there was work to be done. He kept busy. He spent the morning gathering firewood from the nearby woodshed, checking his supplies, and making sure his cabin was secure. Despite the hardship he faced, Jack always kept his cabin in top shape. It was his sanctuary from the outside world, and he took pride in how well he had built it. While Jack worked, the woman finally began to stir. She woke up slowly, her eyes fluttering open as the light from the fire cast flickering shadows across the room. Her gaze was distant at first, and she seemed unsure of her surroundings. She sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and looked at Jack, who was busy adding wood to the fire. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. When Jack finally noticed her awake, he paused in his work and turned toward her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice calm, though there was a tinge of concern beneath it. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at him, her dark eyes studying him carefully. Jack could see the suspicion and fear lingering there. He understood. They were strangers to one another from different worlds with a history that neither could ignore. I'm better," she said softly after a long pause, her voice hoarse from the cold. Jack nodded, his face unreadable. "You've been through a lot. Don't worry. You're safe here for now." The woman said nothing, but Jack could tell she was still processing everything. She seemed lost in thought, and Jack knew there was no rush. They had time. He set about fixing a simple meal, some stew made from the little food he had left. As he worked, he felt the weight of the situation settling over him. He couldn't just leave her in the cabin without answers. He didn't know who she was, why she had been out there in the cold, or even if she had a family or tribe waiting for her somewhere. After a few moments, the woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to help me," she said. almost as if she were ashamed. "You should leave me to go. You have no reason to risk your life for someone like me." Jack stopped what he was doing and turned to her. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the way her shoulders were hunched as if she were preparing to retreat from him again. But Jack wasn't like most people who lived in the West, who turned their backs on others when they were in need. He let out a deep sigh and walked over to her. "You don't understand. I couldn't leave you out there to die. I don't care who you are or where you come from. The cold doesn't care. It takes anyone who's foolish enough to be out there unprepared." The woman's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I was running," she said quietly, as if the words were painful to say. "From my people. My tribe was attacked and I had to leave." Jack raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. They killed everyone. My family, my people. Only a few of us made it out alive," she said, her voice growing shaky. "I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if anyone is still out there." Jack felt a pang of sorrow for her, though he didn't know how to express it. She had been through something no one should ever experience, and here she was, in his cabin, a stranger with a story that mirrored the violence and chaos that often plagued the West. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice low. "You didn't deserve that." "No one does." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm not the only one. There are others. We've been pushed out, hunted like animals, but there's no way to go back now." Jack was silent for a long time, staring at the fire as the weight of her words sank in. There was little he could do to undo the violence she had faced, and he knew that the world beyond his cabin was filled with dangers he had no control over. But at least in this moment he could offer her something: shelter, warmth, and a brief respite from the chaos that had chased her here. They spent the next few days together in silence. Jack didn't ask her too many questions, and she didn't offer up any more details. They simply coexisted, two souls brought together by the merciless winter and a shared need for survival. Jack would chop wood, set traps, and do what he could to keep the cabin warm, while the woman recovered in front of the fire. She would sit for hours, staring into the flames, lost in her thoughts, but occasionally she would help him with small tasks. They worked together, but the bond between them remained tentative. One morning, Jack ventured outside to check on his traps, and when he returned, the woman was gone. Panic surged through him, and he called out her name, his voice thick with worry. He searched the cabin, the woodshed, and around the cabin's perimeter, but there was no sign of her. His heart sank. Had she left in the night? Or worse, had something happened to her? He had no choice but to venture into the woods to search for her. He hadn't gotten far when he finally spotted her, walking slowly through the deep snow. She had a determined look in her eyes, as though she had made up her mind about something. Jack approached cautiously, careful not to startle her. "Where are you going?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's not safe out there." The woman stopped and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I can't stay here," she said, her voice firm now. "I don't belong here. You've helped me, but I can't ask any more of you." Jack stood there, his chest tight with a mix of frustration and concern. He understood her need for independence, but he also understood the dangers of being alone out there, especially in the winter. He had no right to tell her what to do, but that didn't stop him from wanting to help her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "There's no shame in staying. It's safe here." The woman looked at him for a long time before finally speaking. "I'll think about it," she said. And with that, she turned and walked into the snow once again, leaving Jack standing there, unsure of what the future would hold for both of them. But in that moment, Jack realized something. It wasn't just survival that had brought them together. It was something more. It was the shared understanding that in the end, no one could survive the Wild West alone.